Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Friday, September 15th, 2023. I'm your host, George Kerth, in a good mood, hopefully, still when you're listening to this, as we're recording on Thursday night for this Friday release. I'm joined by Cody Roadcap. Cody, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just vibing. I had a pretty good fantasy week, which is very uncommon for me in week one. I'm normally the guy that's like, oh, I don't even care that I lost week one. I get the better waiver pick anyways. But no, I had a pretty good week. George, I know you hinted at it at the top, but why don't you go out? We did this before, but why don't you just go ahead and tell us the final score of the game?
Final score Thursday night, how the Eagles again handled the um, primetime Kirks. We'll say 28-14 in this one.
So
Kirk
28
threw
4.
two more interceptions.
Oh,
So, yeah.
alrighty. So Vikings lose 14-28. And just a reminder for anyone listening, like, what are you talking about? We record this before the game happens, so it's always fun to look back on how it works out. But George, how did your fantasy week go?
Absolutely terrible.
Oh,
Which
I'm
made
sorry to
it,
hear that. Sure, you're
which
not
made it even
alone.
more fun making all that content that I threw up on TikTok. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. I was highlighting some waivers, some start sits for week 2 as I tried to turn it around. Um, no, I was 2-6. It was a rough start. My dynasty leagues are getting together. They were most competitive. My redrafts week 1 is just tough. I was in situations where I had some of those guys drop goose eggs or Dak get me 6 even though they won 40-0. One of those kind of things.
Definitely no, and that's just a good thing to point out. So if you haven't, checked out the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, you'll realize there was a bonus episode this week. This season, I'm planning to do a bonus episode mainly to give you guys updates about our Couch GMs World Cup, which is our 30-team 4-year fantasy competition to see who is the best fantasy player. Definitely recommend you checking out that. But that was the most interesting part, was seeing how Dak Prescott only scored 6. Like, all these guys, we had someone win a matchup scoring 80 points. Like, that never happens. Like, scores were so down in week one. So definitely interesting how fantasy went this past week. Looking forward to it this week, and check out the bonus episode of the podcast.
So yeah, check out that. Check out our TikTok channel, and I guess all of our other socials. We're at the Couch GMs. We have some other content being thrown there fantasy wise, even though we're not entirely focusing on that on the actual show here today. We'll hit some fantasy, but we're going to talk some actual football with you guys as well. Um, and Cody's going to throw some bonus content from that episode. We're going to see some other fun stuff from Tyler coming up as well. We're going to have a good time here this year. We're just going to throw you guys everything that you could possibly want with the NFL. And if you have any ideas, make sure you send us a message. Always, you can DM us with fantasy questions or whatever it might be. Um, just interact with us from our social medias, or you can join our Discord chat as well. That link's still in the description. Um, I think I hit everything you had on the rundown. I was kind of jumping around right there, Cody. But we have some news things to talk about. Why don't we sit back, relax, and chat? Starting off, I know you did a really good job of covering some of the big news on your bonus episode from yesterday, but a couple of big injuries that we should talk about. The Achilles tears to Aaron Rodgers and J.K. Dobbins. Um, I, I think the biggest thing to me is I didn't think either injury was as serious as it was when it first happened. Both of them, you know, walked off to an extent. I guess Rodgers was helped more than Dobbins. Dobbins literally walked off to the sideline. And then all of a sudden he was being helped down the stairs into the locker room. Rodgers, you're like, didn't look like a bad injury. Maybe he just, rolled an ankle or whatever. And then it just escalated from there. Um, both huge blows to the team. I guess we can talk about Rodgers first. What are your takeaways, Cody, when it comes to the Jets and Rodgers?
No, I think you made a great point too. Like, once he stood there for, it probably was, and actually it was like 5 seconds, but it felt like, he was there 30 seconds, like looking on the sideline before he sat back down. So that was definitely interesting. Tough blow. As a Packers fan, I'm no uh slouch, or I always talk about Aaron Rodgers being one of the main reasons why I've fallen in love with the sport of football. What he did for the Green Bay organization is unmatched. And it did stink to see him leave the Packers, but I was excited to watch him still play in New York with the Jets. It was great to see him on Hard Knocks. He had some new passion for it. It also gave us the opportunity to see Jordan Love, and I feel like we were robbed. Like, Jets fans feel it worse than I do because I wasn't in there every day like they are. But I think the NFL, I mean, look at all the primetime games now that we might have to be watching Zach Wilson because they can't flex them all because they were expecting a lot of big things out of him. And I hope it's going to be tough for a 40-year-old to come back from an Achilles injury, but everybody's saying that he'll probably just retire. I think we'll put a big chip on his shoulder. And we've seen 12 with, or I guess 8 now with a chip on his shoulder and what that can do. So give me Rodgers coming back next year and leading the Jets to at least the Super Bowl. Whether they beat the Packers or not, we'll have to wait till we see.
Coming off the Achilles with whatever team they have next year, you're still going as bold as they're going to be in the Super Bowl next year. Okay. That's too far out for me to try to project, but you have fun with that. We're going to clip that and play it back next year in the preseason and in the playoffs, and we'll see how well that goes for you. But I was going to mention, like, you have AR8 on here, and for a half a second, I was going to be like, who the heck is AR8? Because it's AR12, and it just felt wrong. So I'm not even going to call him 8. He's going to be Aaron Rodgers to me.
Okay.
um, Interesting enough, how you mentioned that the Jets can't even trade their first round pick if they want to make a humongous splash move at the deadline because it's technically still tied up in the trade with the Packers, even though it is now a known fact that the Packers are going to be getting their second round pick in next year's draft. The Packers, it still works out for them when you consider that the Jets are probably only going to get 1 year of Aaron Rodgers now instead of the expected 2, and they're still getting a second round pick out of the deal. Um, but I'm sure that's like an afterthought when it comes to a lot of Packers fans being just true Aaron Rodgers fans and seeing him go down. Not a way you want to see him end his season or potentially career, but I'm also in agreement that he's going to be back next year. This is going to be motivation for him. And even though he was 90% out the door this year, he's going to be 90% in the door this year because he's trying to work back in that rehab.
For sure. And just if you didn't check out the bonus episode, as of right now, like George had mentioned, the trade was a conditional second round pick that if Rodgers played 65% of the snaps, became a first round pick. While we know he's on IR, those trades aren't calculated to the end of the season. So technically, both the first and second round pick is tied for the New York Jets. They have a couple options. Uh, One, they just let it ride, and then they can use their picks to go out and get some guys. The other option would be to go back to essentially the trade table with Green Bay and be like, hey, can we just make this a firm second round pick? The Packers could say, sure, have at it. They could also play hardball and be like, we'll make it a second round pick, but let's do a pick swap also. Get us something, a little extra juice so they can get back access to that. They'll probably not have anything major happen until we see what happens. But Marcus, in one of our Facebook groups, a friend of the show, posted about like going out and getting a quarterback, and he brought up the name Cooper Rush because the Cowboys brought in Trey Lance, and Cooper Rush looked serviceable last year. Is there any quarterbacks? I know that's a hot topic. Robert Saleh is like definitely Aaron Rodgers is the guy. Is there any quarterbacks that you think make a ton of sense for them, or are we just going to ride it out with Wilson?
I think they're probably going to have to ride it out with Wilson. And I know there was big Super Bowl aspirations for the Jets this year, but they're still a really young team. It's not necessarily a bad thing for their organization in the long term to try to continue to mold Garrett Wilson, wrong. Zach Wilson, the other Wilson, into a solid starting quarterback for the future. And they still have Rodgers in the building, even though he's not, starting for them and in the practice facility, to kind of still work as a coach with Wilson, hopefully to help him progress. I think he's already seen a little bit of a difference. I mean, he still wasn't the most impressive quarterback in the world after he came in for Rodgers, but when you saw him at his low last year compared to what you saw in week 1 after the Rodgers injury, he looked like a quarterback that had more confidence, that had more I should say confidence is the way to put it. Confidence in the offense, confidence in his skill level to go out there and make plays. Big difference from what we saw last year. So I don't think they're going to make a move. If they end up making a move, I feel like it's going to be one of the veterans, like say a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Derek Carr, for example. Their team completely tanks it in the first half of the year, and those teams just want to offload the contract, and they kind of bring him in as an insurance policy, or they think they might do better than Wilson, that kind of idea. But both those teams are 1-0, so I don't see that happening.
Yeah, the name I keep going back to, and I know a lot of people don't agree with this, and it probably won't happen, is Kirk Cousins. And I only say that because we just watched the Minnesota Vikings lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home to open the season. You, I've said it before, though, it's week one. Week one's crazy. The Jags won the year they went one in, I guess it was still 15 at that time. They won in week
Mhm.
one. They lost the rest of their games. So, like, a
Yep.
lot of things can change. But the Vikings have the Eagles this week, and they also have the Cowboys, the Chiefs, and then they get the Panthers. So there is a realistic path for them to finish 1-4. It's no lie that they've talked about let Kirk Cousins walk this year. And I know people are like, well, Kirk Cousins, he might be worth that first round pick. But if they let him walk, they're only getting a third round pick in 2025. So if you're the Jets and you're sitting there at, 2-3 or 3-2, and it's really just a quarterback away and your defense is still playing great, like, I think you might be able to get a Kirk Cousins for a 2024 third, and then let's say a 2024 fourth for Kirk Cousins and a 2024 fifth, because the NFL likes to throw in those weird things. And they
You
get
won't want
ahead
to
of it.
hear this.
What's that?
Rodgers is included in that trade, and he completes the Brett Favre cycle.
Hey, that, but I don't, that wouldn't happen, but that also gives them, because Kirk Cousins is a free agent, that would allow them to re sign him if Rodgers decides to retire, and now they have Kirk Cousins. Or if
Yep.
he does leave this year, you get the third round pick back in 2025 as a comp pick. So I think
Yep.
that's like a win-win-win for all the teams there. Granted, I hope the Vikings don't do that, because I don't want to see them tank and get Caleb Williams to match up with Justin Jefferson. I want no part of that. But Kirk Cousins is the ski name I would watch at the deadline, but that is contingent on a lot of ifs. If the Vikings are doing bad and the Jets are floating around 500, but you can tell they're still a quarterback away. The good news is the top four teams in the AFC, or we expected some of the top four teams all started out 0-1 this week. So that is probably enough Aaron Rodgers talk. One other big news, Chris Jones, we talked about a lot last week. He did end his holdout very strangely, in my opinion, holdout for an extension, but instead gets a revised deal that just allows for more incentives to incur. Um, he is able to, if he hits these certain goals, get back all the money that he had to pay in fines for not showing up. But I think it's a good move for the Chiefs. It gives them, they'll be able to renegotiate next year. We might go through the same thing. We'll see how he does, how he ages out. But Chris Jones is back with the Chiefs this week. I hinted at it with the AFC. A lot of the guys losing, like Bills, they didn't look great. We talked the Bengals. That was a rough start. What was your biggest surprise or takeaway from week one, if you have one?
The New York Giants, from a play before a field goal to a play after, being a completely different team. I didn't think they were going to win that game, but the fact that that one little momentum swing turned them from the contender that they were last year, at least looking like it, to looking like what we expected the Arizona Cardinals to look like this year, or what the Houston Texans looked like last year, was absolutely shocking to me. Um, I've been publicly out there saying that I think they're going to finish fourth in the NFC East. I think that they are going to finish behind the Washington Commanders. I mean, Tyler would definitely disagree with me with that, but I've said it. Um, but I didn't expect it to be that bad. So they were my biggest surprise as I was watching the games last week, and them playing in week 2 is going to be one of the things I'm watching the most. Was it just the momentum hit you and everyone just went, we're done, or are they really an overrated team?
That is interesting. Speaking of that game, one last question before we get into week two. Did you face the Cowboys defense anywhere in
In
fantasy
two
football?
places, I should have had a 500 record last week in my fantasy games, and the Cowboys defense lost two more
Yeah.
matchups for me.
So
So
just for a fun fact, and my wife had just the Cowboys defense left against Tyler's wife, and she was like, "What are the chances they score 35 points and I win?" I said, very, very slim, and they did. So
you found the week.
you found the week.
You found the 1 week. We've seen a lot of ridiculous defensive scoring outputs. I remember like the Bears of like 6 or 7 years ago, when they got all those turnovers, were one of those kind of teams. They would put up like 20 a week or whatever. I don't know if I've ever seen a 35.
I can tell you when you saw a 35, and I think they actually had a little bit more. I think they were at 39 in some leagues, depending on the scoring, but 35. So the year that our friend, this is completely off tangent. I'm sorry if anyone, you can just skip ahead. But Jalen, the year he won the championship in our league of record, he
Okay.
beat Chance on Arizona beating Green Bay, where they the Cardinals like had 2 pick sixes or a fumble return and a pick six. They scored 35 points and he won a fantasy championship off of that. And since that day, which was probably 2014, 2015 time frame, uh Chance has he hates me for liking the Packers because it's my fault that he lost his fantasy, because that's how crazy we get about fantasy. Uh, but yeah, so defenses can do it, and they play pivotal moments in big games. Luckily, it was week one, and you can bounce back for that, unlike in a championship game. But it has
And
happened, but not
that was
as
2015, just to lock the number down.
perfect. And then, but like the Jets, they went over 20 on that the Miracle in the Meadowlands. I guess we can't call it that because Miracle MetLife.
No,
Because of the
it's still the Meadowlands. It is.
okay,
It's
but
the same stadium that the Eagles' second Miracle in the Meadowlands happened. So
right. So the but like they had that one. The Eagles, they were pretty high. Like there was a lot of like defenses were the 49ers were high, Packers were high. Defenses were very again, if you didn't check out the bonus episode, defenses were more often than not like one of the top 3 fantasy scores for teams this week. That was just how bad the offense went. But George, we're about 15 minutes into this podcast and we still got to preview all of week 2. So why don't we jump into our week 2 NFL preview?
all right, full slate here in week 2. Let's hope the defenses don't outscore the quarterbacks this week like they did last week. I kind of feel like they did. We can start off with a nice divisional matchup, Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals. So we are going to probably hit every matchup just a little bit here. We're going to talk a little different than we have last year, though. We'll hit some injuries, might talk a fantasy bit or two, but we're going to talk some betting options as well, just some details on how these matchups are going to go. And I'll start this one off with when we were back a couple episodes ago. I guess it was last week, projecting out our division winners. These two matchups between the Ravens and Bengals were the two that I had circled as why the Ravens were going to win the division. So this is a big game for Baltimore and a big game for Cincinnati to try to bounce back. But you have to remember Cincinnati started 0-2 last year as well. So don't overreact completely about their week 1 blow up against the Browns.
Yeah, and I think if you didn't get a chance to watch the game and you just were scouting the box score, you don't realize that one, Joe Burrow hasn't really done anything this offseason because of the calf injury. They were very cautious with him bringing him back. They weren't even sure he was going to play week 1. He ended up playing, and then he probably couldn't have asked for worse conditions to play in. It was a wet, sloppy, rainy day in Cleveland, and Cleveland has the Bengals number, and the Bengals and Ravens, they always put up good matches. It's at Cincinnati. Um, and I think there's still a reason, despite the Bengals getting embarrassed, quite frankly, in week 1, there's still a reason they're 3.5-point favorites against the Ravens. I like the Bengals in this one. In terms of fantasy, I know if you have T. Higgins, you were sweating because he put up a goose egg last week.
Yup.
But you can still play him. Like you don't bench him just because of that. He's not in the Drake London tier where he put up a goose egg and you're like, yeah, I might not play him. Yeah, that's understandable. T. Higgins, you're still going to play. And then on the Ravens side, Mark Andrews, if he can go, he's in your lineup because tight ends are such a scarcity. But the guy that really impressed me didn't, Lamar, like you said, he had less than 7 points, but Zay Flowers got a lot of targets and looked really good in week 1. And he's a guy I'm excited to see his role expand, especially now that, they've lost some of the running back in J.K. Dobbins.
Cody hasn't heard this one yet, but you guys will either right around or just after this podcast airs. He's one of my starts of the week this week is Zay Flowers because they were finding all the kinds of creative ways to get the ball in his hands, working in the mid game, the short game, and there was, I think, 3 or 4 jet sweeps that he took carries on too. They recognize that he's an explosive home run hitter kind of guy, and they want to get the ball in his hands. And they still did target Odell Beckham. There was a couple of catches for Rashad Bateman, but Flowers was, in his first game in the NFL, their clear number 1 wide receiver in my eyes.
Yeah, and he looked the part. And Real quick before we move on to the next games, you talked about you're doing start sits over. They used to be an article, but now over on TikTok because it's just easier to get that kind of content and get it more accessible to you guys in that way. But when you do your start sits, can you explain that a little bit? Are they must starts? Are they guys that Are you more in the flex range? Are these guys that have to be in your lineup? For example, you mentioned Zay Flowers. Like, where in like the realm of he's in your starting lineup? Are you looking to the flex, or is like, hey, I'm starting this guy over, you know, T Higgins?
No, so there's guys that are going to be in your lineup every single week. So like T Higgins falls into that. Even though you might have a very sour taste in your mouth for T Higgins, like you drafted him very high, you know his ceiling is really high. He's the kind of guy that's still in your lineup. If you are a team that doesn't have a solid flex option that maybe you're working around with like, the Cam Akers level player or something like that in your flex. If you have a guy on your bench that, is excelling and I have them as like, and you think they have a good matchup or whatever it is, they're the kind of guys you can replace with. If you have a guy that's near that range, especially with a bad matchup, like Cam Akers is actually on my sit that I actually already have out, so go check that out as well. He's the kind of guy that you would replace Zay Flowers with. You don't put him in for a Jamar Chase. You don't put him in for a T Higgins, anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's just a good distinction, and we'll talk about the guys as we go through where we might play them, where we might not. But for the most part, if you drafted the Bengals Ravens players, you're probably playing them, and then the start sits help you supplement your flex guys. Or how do you replace J.K. Dobbins? Maybe you had to move your flex from last week
Yes.
into a running back role, and who you're going to put there, and Zay Flowers might just be that guy. The second game we got on the docket is the Chicago Bears at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are 2.5 point favorites with an over under of 40.5 points. So Buccaneers, they get a win against one NFC North. They get to do it again. Baker Mayfield did pop up on the injury report this week with a shoulder injury. It's something to monitor, but he is listed as a full participant here. And in terms of fantasy, like it's tough out there for where to go with this because, like, Khalil Herbert is in consideration as an RB2 flex kind of guy, but like Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Vita Vea and those linebackers, they are a tough team to run on. Like, you talked about it, like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they're probably in your lineups. Like, they're not like home run must starts, in my opinion. We are a little bit different on those guys as well. But what are your thoughts on matchup, how this game's going to go, or any sneaky fantasy plays?
I know the over under is pretty low in this game, but I still might even hit the under on this one. Like, I think we all forgot how bad, or
The
sorry,
Bears
how
are
good the Buccaneers defense still is. Just like they lost Brady, they're out, we're done. No, they're still going to hang around and contend with people. And I think that combined with the overhyping of the Bears that was then completely shut down by Jordan Love last week. And
I
the
tried
fact
to
that the
tell you.
Buccaneers are now favored. Oh, you did. Exactly. I was on your side too. Maybe not as like vocally like the Bears still suck, but they were all hype because everyone's like Justin Fields is taking a step and they're not going to come back and be a Super Bowl contender that fast. The fact that they're now not they're now underdogs to Tampa Bay tells you how quick people jumped off that bandwagon. Um, this could end up being a very low scoring game, like a Tampa Bay pulls off a 17-13 victory kind of game. And I would not be shocked at all. So I'm avoiding that kind of like all the players that I can in this game. I think there's still a couple places I have to play Khalil Herbert, but he's probably him and DJ Moore are the two I'm thinking of.
And DJ
That I
Moore,
would
like,
probably still,
you probably drafted him to play him, like,
yeah,
this big off-field or off-season acquisition. They gave up the first overall pick to go get him, and he finished with 2 catches for 25 yards. Not that he wasn't open, it was just that, Justin Fields doesn't push the ball, and we haven't said him. He's in your lineup because of his legs.
yeah,
Like, he still had
yeah.
over 50 rushing yards. He was one of the better scoring quarterbacks last week, so Fields is still in there. But I did try to tell everybody, and not a lot of people listened. They were like, "Oh, the Bears are this new team." I'm like, "Guys, they were the worst team in the league last year for a reason, and they look like it." And like I said, it's just week one. Maybe things will turn it around. Um, but not very often is the team that has all the hype having their home fans boo them 8 minutes left in the third quarter.
Exactly. So avoiding as many players as I can in that matchup, and thinking about taking the under in my Hail Mary parlay for the weekend is what I'm thinking for that one.
All right, Hail Mary parlay. If you don't know what that means, that is the betting style that George and I take, where we bet $1 to win, 500 to 1,000, because it's like an 8-leg parlay that most likely won't happen, but one day it will, and we're gonna feel like a
Exactly.
genius. Um,
Yeah,
but
and
let's
I mean, like every week you probably have five of the 8 legs that hit, and it's like, there's a chance that if these 3 plays happen differently, I just won $500 or whatever. But no, it's very low risk, high reward, and it probably will never hit. But when it does, Cody and I will be over here celebrating.
For sure, for sure. The next matchup is the Green Bay Packers, who beat the Chicago Bears last year, like we just mentioned, going to Atlanta. So they're starting 2 games on the road this year. Green Bay is now 1.5 point underdogs after opening as 1 point favorites. So you might ask why, and that is because we are now through Wednesday and Thursday of both Aaron Jones and Christian Watson not practicing. And we saw it last week when Jones wasn't as involved, the offense wasn't as good, and that would be their 2 best and most explosive players. Don't forget Romeo Dobbs was limited last week with the hamstrings, and he's limited in practice, but he's not fully back to 100% yet. So we just talked about all the things why Green Bay looks so good, but that was probably to play Chicago, and this could be a rough week for me. So let me ask you this, because I'm the homer, so I want some as non-biased advice as possible. It's a 1 o'clock game. So if they say Aaron Jones is active, is he in your lineup?
Yeah, I think he is.
If they say Christian Watson is in your lineup or is active, is he in your lineup?
That one's tougher for me.
Christian Watson or
Um,
Zay Flowers?
oh man, yeah, now you got me.
I know. It's like I do this for a living. I'm just kidding. I don't.
I
I put on the
yeah,
spine.
right. You you recorded 1 to 2 episodes at most weeks with me for the last 3 years. Now you're like, you know how to push my buttons here. I would debate going Zay Flowers, as ridiculous as that sounds, with how high you drafted Christian Watson. But I feel like there's a chance that, I mean, if Jones goes, Jones could get 2 touchdowns in short yardage situations, turn 8 carries into a very solid fantasy day. Not as confident about that with Christian Watson when they could just roll out Romeo Dobbs again and, just have him lead the offense, use some tight end work from Musgrave. Watson gets 1 catch. Like, I feel like there's much more risk to the reward with Christian Watson being a game time active as opposed to Aaron Jones.
Yeah, Musgrave. If you don't have one of those top 4, he should be owned and probably played. With the injuries to Watson, the limit. He had the second most receiving yards of any tight end in week 1 as a rookie. Had 4 targets. He got a cramp on a play, so he fell down like 5 yards short of the touchdown, which is like the most rookie moment ever. But he could have scored. So Musgrave is a big part of the Packers offense. I think he played the most snaps. Uh, compare That's not the line or the quarterback, because they play every single snap. So he was out there the most for Green Bay. So Musgrave is definitely a guy worth adding. And then AJ Dillon, we used to look at him as a lock to if Aaron Jones wasn't to play, but he had like 13 carries for 19 yards or something like that. Like he was just not very efficient last week. I don't know if that was week 1, that was jitters. He's probably worth a play if Aaron Jones is inactive just due to volume, but it's not like a home run that we used to think of. But the Falcons, they got 2 running backs that I think you can play both.
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, they're still committed to running the ball heavily, and Bijan's got all that skill. But, man, the Tyler Algier truther in me appreciated his touchdowns last week. And there was a rush on the waiver wire for him, too. He's one of the most added running backs this week. We have to remember it's not going to be that way every single week. Algier is still a little bit of a risky play. But when it comes to like running back twos having to play them, he's probably one of the safer ones. I like playing him better than AJ Dillon right now. We'll see if that changes when you get later in the year and AJ Dillon gets to that part of the year where everybody's a little bit bruised up, where he always seems to do better at wearing people down. He has more of the Derrick Henry type running style that way, so he does better late in games and late in the year. as opposed to guys like Tyler Algier, who's a little bit more shifty and he's going to find his way into the end zone in different kind of situations.
Definitely. And it is worth noting where I do think you can play both running backs this week if you need to. Bijan would still be number one, Algier would be number
Yes.
two. Um, Cordarrelle Patterson could be back this week too and cause a little bit more in that mix too. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Just line him up at receiver like you should and use him in those gadget plays and leave our running back tandem alone.
Yeah, but those gadget plays,
Sincerely, every fantasy player ever. Sorry.
they like to use those in the red zone, which complicates a lot
Ain't that
for
the truth? Cordarrelle Patterson gets 4 touchdowns in a game because he can. That's typically how it happens.
but we got to keep this moving. So we got the Indianapolis Colts at the Houston Texans. Most notably, Anthony Richardson, who did not finish the game against the Texans last week, is not even on the injury report, so he is good to go. So we're going to get to see the number 2 overall pick versus the number 4 overall pick. The running back by committee in Indianapolis gets a little bit more interesting as Zach Moss is a full participant, where I can never remember the guy's first name, but Null, the rookie, he went on IR. And then Deion Jackson, he had 2 fumbles last week, so it wasn't a great start for him. So Zach Moss might be a guy. It is the Houston Texans. They give up some rushing yards, uh, or they have in the past, I should say. So Zach Moss, not you're not gonna feel great about it, but maybe not put him in your lineup right away. Maybe wait and see, but maybe not a bad guy to throw in a DFS lineup if that's more of your style of fantasy.
I agree. Yeah, because I have guys everywhere I have Zach Moss, I have guys I trust more. But the door is wide open for Zach Moss to take over the hot hand running back lead in the committee that the Colts say that they're going to use until they get back Jonathan Taylor. Am I the only one that's shocked that the Colts are underdogs in this?
You are, but now you're gonna make me double check that I didn't have a typo because
Okay.
that would
No, I mean, like, I get it. Like, the
unless it's
Colts
the home
are
point thing.
what you would consider on the downswing, but both teams have a rookie quarterback. The Texans should have been the worst team in the league last year. Like that's why I was a little shocked to see it wasn't plus 1.5 for Houston instead of for Indy.
Nope,
But it's close either way.
I have it right. It is Indianapolis plus 1.5. So maybe that's a bet you're willing to take out there if you are into doing some parlays. Maybe that'll be on your parlay, one of those ones that hit. But
And I would be okay with taking the plus 1.5 for Indy instead of taking their money line and just saying they win because a 1.5, like if they win, if they would lose that game barely, like or whatever, like no, I'll take that L and be like, tip your hat to Vegas. There's such little room for error there.
that's a valid point too. Um, But in terms of, I think Michael Pittman's an interesting name as a flex guy in this matchup. He got in the end zone over 10 points. Seems to be having a building connection with Anthony Richardson. And I also do like Anthony Richardson as a starting quarterback this week. He probably wasn't too available on the waiver wires because a lot of people took him as a second quarterback just because of the upside that you saw with him. But with Aaron Rodgers going down again, that was another late round quarterback. Maybe you doubled up on late round quarterbacks with Rodgers and Richardson, or maybe you just lucked into Richardson. We already saw him getting some rushing yards, got into the end zone, passing and rushing. So he could be one of those sneaky guys that might not be putting up big time stats, but is great for fantasy football. Texans, I have no idea. I don't think there's anybody worth playing. Not even Damian Pierce.
Some guys that I'm watching for, because they actually had some receivers show some, decent output last week. And I think like the new quarterback play is bringing out a little bit there. But it's a little early in the season for me to want to really, hitch my wagon to any of them. But I'm keeping an eye on them. Never know who's going to break out down the stretch if the Texans start getting a little bit of momentum going.
And we could see if Tank Dell does break out. The Kansas City Chiefs are going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars are 3.5-point underdogs. But the biggest news on top of the Chris Jones extension that we talked about at the top of the show is that Travis Kelce was limited, but is expected to play, or at least they're hopeful he plays this week. And if he does play, he's back in your lineup. Even if they say he's on a snap count, he's back in your lineup just because I would rather take 10 Travis Kelce snaps in the red zone than a flyer on Dalton Kincaid. Although I think Dalton Kincaid's a good play this week, I still would play Travis Kelce.
Limited Travis Kelce or Luke Musgrave?
I would still take 10 snaps because the Chiefs would be like they're not going to play him in between the 20s if he's limited. Like he'll play on third downs and in the red zone. And that's
Yeah.
what he'd be the money guy. And so I think a limited Travis Kelce is in your lineup. And again, it's the tight end position. It's so high variance anyways. Like give me a guy that's the number one wide receiver or number one pass catcher option. He is a tight end.
Yeah, but it's true because every single tight end stunk last week, basically. So yeah, I'm with you. To play Kelce regardless. Jags hanging in there in the line being plus 3.5 against Kansas City. But I don't see Kansas City dropping 2 duds to start the year, especially he's having Chris Jones and Travis Kelce back. So I'm expecting a turnaround from all of their guys. And I think they'll handle the Jaguars pretty easily. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think they'll win too. I would probably, if I was betting, I would probably take the Chiefs and the points. Like, I think they'll,
Chiefs minus 3.5. Yep.
yeah, I would do that. But don't hear what I'm not saying. Like, I think there's some pieces in terms of fantasy wise. Like, I think Trevor Lawrence is still a good game. The over under is at 50, which is pretty high, or 51, I should say. But you still think like this is a match that could go over it. So, like, Kevin Ridley, dude looked so good in week 1. He's back in your lineup in week 2 for sure. Travis Etienne, he's a guy you're still playing. I mean, I ain't taking no flyer on Kadarius Toney, even though he'll probably have a bounce back game, hopefully. But
I don't know if I could touch anything with Kadarius Toney. I mean, he can't even touch passes. I guess he can touch them, but that's it. But
real quick for the Chiefs, any concern about the Pacheco with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Like, is Pacheco now like borderline not playable because of that? Like, they just don't run the ball enough, or do you think that was more of how the season started last year and Pacheco will slowly overtake?
I feel like it's gonna end up eventually turning to Pacheco's gonna overtake them. I think he did get a little bit banged up, but he's not gonna be a workhorse back. It's just not how the Chiefs roll. Jerick McKinnon's gonna have his games. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still gonna get involved some. But I think the Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing, they catch us a little off guard. Hopefully, you are like me pre-week 1, where Pacheco is not required to be in your lineup, like you have other options, and not me post-week 1, where Pacheco is my second best back because J.K. Dobbins got hurt.
Yeah, that's potential. And if you want to talk about, injuries not helping out in fantasy, we could talk about our next matchup, which is the Los Angeles Chargers and the Tennessee Titans. Titans are 3-point underdogs heading into this one. And DeAndre Hopkins is already on the injury report, not practicing 2 straight days. And just for a fun fact for all the listeners out there, in our league of record, in our league, I am known as the wide receiver guru. I take all the wide receivers. I'm often the guy that has 7 and then just trying to trade for a running back. So I had the opportunity to surprise everybody, and I took 3 running backs and a quarterback in my first 4 picks, which is not advised. And then but it allowed me to get Christian Watson, who I thought would break out, and then the guy that Tyler's been hyping up, who I wasn't a big fan of, but I'm like, let me get him in one league, DeAndre Hopkins. So now I didn't take any wide receivers till round 5, and in week 2, I'm most likely not having any wide receivers to play because I have to pick up the guys I drafted later. So trust me.
So your current starting wide receivers are Mike Williams, and you currently have DeAndre Hopkins. And let's check out that bench. Michael Pittman, that could end up working out okay for you. Tutu Atwell, and
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah. So guys, if you, I can feel some fantasy pain, and that's the league I won in, and I couldn't go get Puka Nakua. But we'll talk about him in
At least your
a little
your
bit.
third best back is Jahmyr Gibbs. Like you're looking good there. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs. But having running backs carry your team, number 1 is weird for you. Number 2 is a lot harder to do in fantasy than wide receivers. We have learned over recent years.
Which is why I don't. But let's talk about this actual game. Chargers and Dolphins last week might be one of the best games that we'll see all season, and we got to see it in week 1. The Chargers, though, that was a competitive game back and forth. And if you're new to the show, you're going to hear me say this a lot when we preview games. But the Chargers are a West Coast team going east at 1 o'clock, and George shakes his head. But you realize now they're playing a game at what their body would say is 10 a.m. So they
That's
might start
not
slow.
that's not the reason why I'm gonna say this game's gonna be close. I mean, I get it. Yeah, that's a thing. But the Titans defense should technically be more stingy than the Dolphins was. Like that Chargers Dolphins matchup, you kind of had a feeling was like destined to be a shootout. The Titans win games by grinding the ball on you, so less time of possession, and having a defense that might give up some yards but doesn't give up easy touchdowns. Like this is going to be a completely different game script than what you saw in Chargers Dolphins last week, which is why the Chargers are going to struggle to put up that, any points over 21 maybe.
I don't know if it'll be that tough. I think if it's that tough, it's because they start slow because they're not used to playing football that early.
Because
Um,
of the Chargers. No, what?
no, but with the Chargers, they also might not. They probably won't have Austin Eckler, so Joshua Kelly. He was a top waiver wire pickup. To George's point, this is a very good Titans defense. So I probably wouldn't I wouldn't force Joshua Kelly in my lineup if Eckler didn't go. But he's a viable option if you're similar to how I am with wide receivers at running back. Like I understand you might have to do that. George raises his hand. Um, but the thing is, like, I don't know what to expect from this Titans offense. Like it was
Yeah.
very interesting. Don't get me wrong. Ryan Tannehill did not play great in week one, and it was just week one. But he did not look like the guy. He looked like the guy that we saw at the end of last year that we, kind of talked about. Well, he has double ankle injuries, so maybe but it doesn't seem like he's fully back. And again, not trying to overreact to week one. Their big offseason acquisition of DeAndre Hopkins is already banged up. Yeah, they still have Traylon Burks. Tajay Spears, the rookie, outsnapped Derrick Henry and was in all the third down passing game work. So we could see a little bit more split there than we were expecting. Just because Tajay Spears, it's to him. He's super dynamic with the ball in his hand. But I think it's a little bit surprising to see in week one he already outsnapped Derrick Henry. So just a lot of interesting things coming from the Tennessee Titans, which makes this game very hard to predict. To George's point, though, like the Titans +3 might not be a bad bet just because of how good the defense is.
Yeah, I still don't know if I would go Titans +3, but the over under I think is more where I'm looking at. Like the under is a possibility. If we're not confident in the Titans scoring a lot of points on offense, and between I guess the West Coast team coming east and the fact that the Chargers are facing a more stingy defense this week, topped with Eckler probably not playing at this point, it seems like a recipe for less than 45 points.
Could be. We got two more 1 o'clock games. Let's talk about those real quick. Las Vegas Raiders are at the Buffalo Bills, and the Raiders. Devontae Adams went DNP to full participant, so it sounds like Wednesday was more of a rest day with a foot injury. Jacoby Myers, who was out there balling last week, ended up with a concussion and has not practiced yet. So now that it's Thursday and he's still not practicing, very unlikely he goes. So probably not in your lineup, but Hunter Renfrow DFS, and then Jimmy G limited to full time participant. The Bears, only their center is on their injury report, so they only have one guy to mark on their injury report, so they're pretty healthy.
The
But
Bills, you mean?
yeah, I don't know who I said.
You have Bears. Okay,
Uh,
got it.
well, they look like the Bears
Wrong
out there.
animal.
They looked like the Bears out there with all those turnovers and stuff on what was that Monday night. So
Yep.
Buffalo, I hope to see a bounce back game. I think we were not expecting the Raiders to, win in week one. So I think this is an interesting game, but I'd take Buffalo, and I think the odds makers, despite the pretty poor performance on Monday night, giving the Bills 8.5 points is all you need to know about this game.
I think we saw hero mode Josh Allen, which is not the Josh Allen you want to see. You want to see, him letting his talent come out, not him trying to play Superman. That's when he commits all those turnovers, and it's going to correct back to the norm. like we talked about, the Bengals had a rough week 1, the Chiefs had a rough week 1, the Bills had a rough week 1. These are still the class of the AFC. And a lot of times you can chalk this kind of thing up to they didn't play in the preseason. Teams still take time to gel and get into a rhythm. And I'm not worried about them. The 8.5 did kind of flash at me like maybe the Raiders could cover that, but I don't think they're gonna win that.
Yeah, I mean, anytime it's over a touchdown, you have to think, okay, do I want that? Like,
It's
because
at least tempting, but I'm
yeah,
picking the Bills to win the game.
for sure, I'm with you on that one. But like, maybe they're down by 2 and they get that touchdown with 35 seconds left, and they kick the onside kick. Like that
Yep.
happens all the time where they get like the backhand cover. I believe I'm not the best better, but I believe that is the correct term for that. But anyways, one last game.
Kempy, where are you?
Yeah, where are you, Kempy? Seattle Seahawks at the Detroit Lions. Seahawks disappointed in week 1. Detroit, they won. I mean, I might be the person that's like not impressed with their victory. Like, I didn't think it looked great. Like, I was expecting more. And
Mm-mm.
again, it's week 1, so they have a lot to build on. But there's been a lot of crowning the Lions, and I was like, guys, like they weren't that efficient on offense. They got a ball off someone's hands, gift wrapped it to them that they got to that gave them the momentum back in the game. Don't get me wrong, they held Patrick Mahomes. Like their defense played better than expected. So like I don't want to discredit their win, but I'm not like that game didn't make me go Detroit Lions Super Bowl champs, if that makes sense.
No, agreed. And it's weird that the script in week 1 for them was the complete opposite script of last year, where last year it was like play everyone on the Lions in fantasy and play everyone against the Lions in fantasy because their defense stinks. No, it was like, oh, their defense played super solid and their offense just sputtered. And it was so weird. Um, But no, right. I think it's more the Chiefs lost the game than the Lions won the game. But still, the fact that the Lions could hang in with the class of the AFC and the Chiefs still says that they're going to be a productive team this year. The Seahawks, I think, outplayed expectations greatly last year, and their Week 1 game was within the realm of possibility. So I still think the Lions should handle them. But I guess it was a pretty big drop off for Seattle compared to what you saw last year.
For sure. I will say I believe the Seattle Seahawks had to sign 41-year-old Jason Peters because both their tackles are hurt, and their right tackle ended up on uh, IR. So he'll miss a couple games. So with how well Aiden Hutchinson looked, playing with a hand tied
Yes.
behind his back, essentially, because Jawan Taylor lined up two back every time, which we don't need to revisit that. Uh, whatever the sack prop is, if you want to throw that into a parlay, I definitely like this. And I think Detroit will win this game. I think we saw a little bit of Geno Smith coming back to earth. He's a guy that needs to be protected with the offensive line issues. I am concerned about it. So I would take Detroit in this game. And I don't know if you saw Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, former Philadelphia Eagle, now on the Detroit Lions, wants all the Lions fans to show up in blue ski masks for their home opener. And the blue ski masks are now sold out on Amazon. So expect to see a lot of blue ski masks in Detroit.
So the New York Giants are playing against the Arizona Cardinals.
I mean,
I'm not even gonna mention. I'm not even gonna talk about that. Why ski masks? I don't even want to give that thought any more attention. Um, this game is interesting to me. I just talked about how is week 2 gonna come back for the Giants. You have what should be a marginally easier matchup against the Cardinals. But the Cardinals hung in week 1 against the Commanders. So they're showing that they're not a complete slouch. They have no quarterback play.
I was trying to think about this, and this episode should just be called "Cody Goes Off on Tangents," and I'm okay with that because it's week
Okay.
1. There's a lot to talk about. Like, I don't want to say I don't know how to word it, okay? But like Josh Dobbs has come to so many situations with like little to no practice time. He did it with Tennessee last year. He did it with Arizona this year, and like doesn't look great, but like I've seen a lot worse, and I don't know how to put that into words. Uh, but he makes it interesting, and maybe it was we were buying too much into the hype for the Commanders with the new owner and they were selling out. Maybe we're drinking a little too much Kool-Aid there. That could have been the case too. And the Cardinals just put up a good fight. And maybe their defense is a little bit better. Maybe Jonathan Gannon isn't, as an Eagles fan, is probably going to roll his eyes at this, can coach defense better than you gave him credit for. But this game
I
is
wasn't the
interesting.
person totally complaining about Jonathan Gannon. I had some of the concepts maybe, but overall he had a very solidly coached defense.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. But yeah, but like the Giants also just got straight up embarrassed, and like I don't think they're I don't think they're like, again, Super Bowl contenders, but I don't think they're a bad team whatsoever. Like, and they looked good until the field goal got blocked. Like they drove the first drive, they went right down
Don't
the
make that
field.
sound like it's halfway through the game. It was literally 4 minutes in after like 10 offensive snaps.
But what I'm saying is they marched right down the field. It looked like, their first 15 probably, or looked good, and then that happened, and then it was just
Yeah.
spiraled out of control. Again, no, they definitely have plenty of time to get back in that game. Well, not really. That game was over 5
Well,
minutes.
yeah, made 3 turnovers for touchdowns later. Yeah, it was pretty rough, but
But I think all that to say is the Giants are still the favorites in this game. Darren Waller went DNP to limited, but he said at his locker today, "Yeah, I'm playing. It's not an issue." So it seems like they're being cautious more than anything, with that being the hamstring that he was bothered by last year some. But in terms of, fantasy wise, like Saquon's definitely in. That's probably it for the Giant. Waller too. Sorry, if he goes,
yeah, you have to play Waller.
you have to play Waller. But then on like the Arizona side, like I know we talked about, like James Conner was that guy that, well, he's going to get the volume. He's going to get the volume. And he got the volume, but he didn't, like, it wasn't a terrible day in terms of how bad week 1 was, but it wasn't a great day. So like, are you still playing James Conner?
Um
But not.
Probably.
All right.
Well, it depends what league you're talking. If I'm in a league where like I actually have a decent 2 running backs and didn't get hit with the injury bug, I'm probably not. But our league of record, for example, I'm sitting here like Isaiah Pacheco, James Conner, Gus Edwards play 2. Like that's the state of my team at the moment. It's not good.
All right, so let's
But he's at least a borderline flexible option that like he's gonna have the volume, like you said.
so real quick, I'll just give you a couple names. James Conner or Josh Kelly with no Eckler.
With no Eckler, I'm probably going Josh Kelly.
Okay. I was going to bring up Gus Edwards or Justice Hill.
I think I would probably play Connor. Edwards is closer than Hill.
Interesting. And then the one guy I think he was in he was either in waiver wire ads or start sit. Kyron Williams, James Conner.
This one's tough because the only reason I don't love Kyron Williams as a slam dunk is because Akers is still there to take touches. So like you got to hope he gets enough volume. If he gets even 12 to 15 carries, I think I'm going Kyron Williams. I think that's possible. So I'll say slightly in Kyron Williams, but that's a toss up.
All right, so why don't we talk about those Los Angeles Rams as they host the San Francisco 49ers? And despite the Rams surprising a lot of people, myself included, because you and Tyler both, I think, picked them to make the playoffs this year, and I was like, you guys are on something. And they came out and won in week 1, but again, it was just week 1. But they're 7.5-point underdogs. The 49ers seems pretty realistic. Is how good San Francisco looked in week 1.
Yeah.
Uh,
Divisional game.
game.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask. So, like, if you're in a fab league, I think Puka Nakua was the most spent on guy this past week. A lot of people went after him. For me, especially in this matchup, like, even if I spent, 50% of my fab, which in some leagues people did, they spent over $50 to go get him because of how many targets he got. Like, I'm not forcing him in my lineup. I know that's crazy for a guy that you spent that much on, but I am not forcing him in my lineup this week.
I'd kind of hope if you spent that much on him, you desperately needed him, and then you kind of like have to play him as a flex. Like you never know. If you're in a situation where you're talking about the three guys I had are Puka Nakua, like there's a chance you still play Puka Nakua. But if you spent that much fab on him and you aren't in a desperation mode where you have to put him in your lineup, why did you spend that much fab on him? That's my question.
I mean, as insurance, as preventing maybe somebody that you had some guys injured, then you're facing them this week. There could be some options. So let me ask you this: I'll just run through a couple quick players: Puka Nakua or Zay Flowers,
Zay Flowers.
Puka Nakua or Drake London.
Let me just double check that Falcons matchup is
They
with the Packers.
Yeah. Fun fact: Desmond Ridder is 26-0 in college and in the pros at home. So about to be 26-1.
Yeah. Okay. I'll lean Nakua.
You'll
Sure.
lean Nakua there. What about Nakua or Michael Pittman?
Michael Pittman, he had a solid week 1 still.
Okay.
I'd rather take the longer track record in that one.
Awesome. All right. So just keep a couple names there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And then the 49ers, everybody. Like I think you play Brock
including
Purdy.
Brandon Ayuk. I actually had a situation where I faced Brandon Ayuk on a bench and still lost thanks to the Cowboys defense, but you're playing him too.
Yes, Brandon Ayuk. And I think we talked about this, the draft show, how we liked the value of Brandon Ayuk better than Deebo Samuel because Ayuk was going a little bit later than Deebo. So that's why you should listen to us all year round. You just talked about the Cowboys defense. They get to go against the New York Jets here. And the Aaron Rodgers effect is real because the New York Jets have the biggest point spread. They are 9.5-point favorites, or underdogs. I am so sorry.
Yeah, 9.5-point underdogs.
Underdogs against the Dallas Cowboys after what happened on Sunday night and Monday night. Breece Hall, limited, but looked really good in week 1, coming back from the ACL injury. If he's out there, I'd play Breece Hall. Brandon Cooks is a DNP, but then also all along their offensive line is Zach Martin and Tyler Smith. So offensive line issues, we could see some issues with Tony Pollard, which you're still playing despite it being a very good matchup. You're still playing CeeDee Lamb despite it being a very good matchup, or not very tough matchup. But
and then that's it for me. Just those two.
That would be if I had to throw, like if I wanted to take a flyer on Jake Ferguson, there's other guys I like better than him. But like if you want to do that, okay. But that's
a tight end. Tight ends are dart throws.
Right.
The tight end dartboard, even though we're not talking straight fantasy, the tight end dartboard's coming back this year.
It's already here. But I feel like you have to take, if you're betting, you have to take the Jets and the points. Like I know that sounds crazy because we just watched them put up 40 points and we saw how bad Zach Wilson could be. And like even like Garrett Wilson, like I don't even really want to play Garrett Wilson this week. Like that's really interesting. Garrett Wilson or Puka Nakua, the waiver wire guy, or Garrett Wilson, who you drafted in the 3rd round, but you expected him to have Aaron Rodgers. Like that would be that sounds so crazy to say out loud, but like you're at least thinking it.
Don't overreact too much though. Like he had subpar quarterback play the whole second half of last year, and he was like the fantasy darling. Don't expect.
Not with Beck. It was with Mike White.
Fair, but like I've mentioned, we saw progression out of Zach.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm probably not. I would probably still start Garrett Wilson this week, but if I had, and maybe not Puka Nakua, but like the guy that has Brandon Ayuk on the bench, I would play him over Garrett Wilson if I had the opportunity to do that kind of stuff. Like if you had someone like that on the bench, I would probably play him over Garrett Wilson.
I would still play Garrett Wilson, but I get it. The matchup's tough. This is also the lowest over-under on the week at 38.5. And I think a lot of it has to do with the Cowboys pitching a shutout and the Jets being on a backup quarterback. But it's not the same situation in my mind. And that's not a lot of points. I'm leaning over, maybe not by a lot. And that's also weird to say when I'm like, don't play Dak in fantasy. Don't play any secondary Cowboys wide receivers in fantasy. Like it just sounds wrong when I'm saying it that way, but like I think points are going to find a way to be scored, even if it's with the defenses. You could see 14 points on straight defenses and then another 14 points off of turnovers.
Yeah, I think you play both defenses in this matchup for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, like right there, I just said it's realistically possible that defenses directly correlate to 28 points. You're asking for 11 points out of offenses then. Fantasy games are going to be destroyed, but the over-under is attainable.
I think 28's. I think that's a little rich, personally.
Defensive touchdown each side, and then like a short field for the offense on each side.
Okay, so you're not saying the defenses score 14 points apiece.
No, I'm
Okay,
saying 7 points each for the defenses, and then 7 points off turnover for the
gotcha.
defenses.
I gotcha. Okay, that makes
So like Cowboys example, their second drive of the game when they get a touchdown in fantasy, you get nothing, but their defense basically directly gave them 7 points.
Gotcha. We're on the same page now. At first, I thought you were
Mhm.
saying 28 of the 30 points or 35 points would have been scored by the defenses in this matchup. I was like,
No,
George,
no,
that is bold. But we
no.
got
Points off turnover. How defenses can more realistically affect games than directly getting pick sixes or fumble sixes, but works just as well.
we are on the same page now. So let's talk about the last
Yes.
clock game. Washington Commanders at the Denver Broncos. The Washington Commanders are underdogs. Yeah, I don't have too much to say about this game. They both are like meh, in my opinion. Like, okay, that's my summary. I'm sorry.
Broncos country, let's cry.
Wow.
It doesn't look like it's gotten any better.
I wasn't, because the Packers game was on. I was not watching like Red Zone and stuff like that. That's just when the Packers are on, I watch them. When it's other windows, I watch Red Zone and that kind of stuff. And like
Yep.
I remember seeing a tweet like Russell Wilson, 10 for 12, 100 yards and a touchdown, perfect passer rating, and I was like, oh, he's balling out. And I like they had 16 points and lost. I was like, what?
Yeah, like I think the efficiency was better, and maybe that's like a step in the right direction for the Broncos offense, but they still look like they're stuck in the mud.
All right, so are you playing anyone fantasy wise for this matchup?
Javonte Williams for the
Broncos.
opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too.
Yeah, just for the opportunity. You might be able to start one of the Commanders running backs. I think Brian Robinson did all right. That's a desperation move, but no one has running backs. At least I would like to believe that, as I don't have running backs, but that could just be me.
Yeah, so not a lot of action on this matchup. So there's some better action out there. If you have any questions related directly to players on this team, as always, feel free to reach out to us and DM us if we didn't get to those players. But let's move on to Sunday night, where it's the Miami Dolphins against the New England Patriots. The Patriots are only 2.5 point underdogs, and I want to talk about them. So the storyline was Tom Brady came back in week 1. They were playing the Eagles. The Eagles did get the victory, but I think the Patriots played better overall. And it could just be that the Eagles didn't play any in the preseason. And I think Sirianni, even after the game, said, yeah, we might take a look about playing in the preseason next year,
Yeah.
just because they looked a little bit sloppy. I don't want to read too much into it. Again, we're not trying to overreact. But I'm kind of surprised that maybe because division, that the spread is so low after the high output that we saw from the Dolphins last week.
I think Belichick still gets points taken off of the spread because of having, Coach Belichick on that team. But I actually mentioned it in TikTok. Tua's 4-0 against Patriots.
Yeah, the Patriots have always, even back to Brady, been the one team that could like get on. They could be like 2-10 and somehow
Yep.
still make it competitive with like. And it doesn't matter which the coach was. And a lot of times those are the games in Miami. This one is in New England. So we'll have to go and see how
Doesn't seem
that.
to matter.
But like you said, Tua is 4-0.
Yep.
He we talked about it. He started out so good last year and I think we kind of like with the whole, is he going to play? Should he play? He did cool off when he came back, and for sure. So there was definitely some concerns. Him and Tyreek Hill, they just have a connection, and I still think back to that offseason where people were like dogging on him for that video that looked like he underthrew Tyreek Hill. Yeah, he doesn't miss
Yep.
now. So
No.
Tua,
He figured it out.
I know it's a tough matchup. I know the point spread is not very good, but I'd still play Tua this week if you're in that situation. Tyreek Hill is a no-brainer. I wouldn't touch the running backs, and
False.
I would.
Everyone's still hurt. Play Mostert.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
You can say that. Last week, I the last second was like, nah, I'm playing Mostert in some places because he's the only one active, and you have a solid week. If there's still no Devin Achane and Jeff Wilson's on IR, play Mostert. If he's gonna be the only guy there, he's the only guy that's gonna get touches.
You're being very disrespectful to Salvin Ahmed right now.
Salvin Ahmed didn't affect me last week. He's not affecting me this week. My tunnel vision is on.
All right, your tunnel vision is on, but it is a tough team to run on too. So
It is now. But if an offense is going to put up points against them, it's the Dolphins. They've always had their number, like they said. Cody's looking something up, but I don't see a reason why Miami couldn't handle this game. But the Patriots are going to keep it closer than we're trying to make it sound, just because it's divisional and it is the Patriots. But
no,
I'm pretty confident Miami.
And I was just confirming that Raheem Mostert does have a knee injury that he missed Wednesday's practice, but he was full on.
He was full Thursday. Yeah.
So maybe just some rest day, and we'll have to wait and see. On the Patriots side, I know you really like Kendrick Bourne. He was one of your guys to go out and add this week. Devontae Parker's limited. Are you confident enough to throw Kendrick Bourne out there? And before you know, I'm just going to ask you Kendrick Bourne or Zay Flowers, because that seems to be the mark of the episode.
Zay Flowers is the mark. I'm going Zay Flowers, but Kendrick Bourne's right there.
All right. You want to talk about Monday Night Football?
Sure thing.
There's two games.
Double header.
It's a double header on week 2 this year. I don't know why they don't do it instead of week 1, unless it was the whole. I don't want to. That sounded so rude. They'd had like the extra special. New York gets both home games on the weekend of 9/11, so I think they did.
Yes.
That's why they moved the double header to week 2. So New Orleans Saints and Carolina Panthers. Let's talk about both at the same time. And Cleveland Browns at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Luckily, they're only starting an hour apart. The one starts at 7:15 Eastern. The one starts at 8:15 Eastern. So one will be on ESPN, one will be on NBC, so you can watch both. I know that's been an issue in the past. And we're going to see both games, so you'll be able to channel flip back and forth. Too bad you won't be able to get the 4-box on YouTube TV's Sunday Ticket because they're local games, so have to figure out a different way. It would be cool if ESPN had a 2-box for both games. We should look into
that.
Right? Dude, speaking of
ESPN 2, we don't need any Manning cast. Let's just do a double box.
Okay. Again, Cody goes off on a tangent. Did you hear about the London game for Disney Plus, which is the ESPN company?
No.
So you know how we've had the Nickelodeon game in the past. So now this year they're doing it on Disney Plus. The London game on October 1st, I believe it is. It has the Jaguars in it. Their Jaguars annual game will be simulcast on Disney Plus, and they are somehow in real time making it animations of people playing football on the floor in Andy's room from Toy Story. And like Bo Peep, Woody, Buzz Lightyear, they're going to be on the side. Like, it's supposed to be like this complete animation immersive thing in real time. It sounds incredible. I don't know how they're going to do it. As like a video guy, it's like super nerdy. Like, I'm definitely like going to have to check that out. Like, it's not just adding googly eyes and sliming a coach. Like, somehow they're going to have real-time animations of the Trevor Lawrence throwing a pass to Calvin Ridley on a football field that looks like it's being played in Andy's bedroom.
I am immediately going to have to teleport myself back to when I was 8 years old, eating my Lucky Charms on the floor with that game on the TV.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm sold. This is the first I'm hearing of this, so this is my genuine reaction. I'm sold.
No, I heard about it the other day. It's like they did not just say they're playing a game on Disney Plus, and then it came out today.
When you say that, you would think, oh, they're just streaming it on Disney Plus because it's like, oh, it's an ESPN game and you can get it with Disney Plus.
Oh, there's some. Yeah, it's crazy. Definitely excited for that one, and we'll talk more about that. But let's go back to this Monday. Let's not put this football season away. We just got here. Saints Panthers. I'll let you talk about that one. I'll talk about the other one, and then we can wrap up because we are going long.
All right. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about with Saints Panthers. Divisional game can kind of go either way. Jamal Williams, you didn't really play him last week because he was in that tougher matchup against the Titans. Maybe you did. But I think this is a much more favorable matchup if you're running back desperate. Jamal Williams can jump into your lineups there. Um, Juwan Johnson was one of the dart throw tight ends. He was limited on Thursday. But that's obviously the first practice report of the week for a Monday night game, so a lot can happen. I think he's probably going to be good to go. Um, I think the Saints win this game. I would take the Saints to cover as well. On the Panthers side, I don't think there's anyone super crazy, to think about for fantasy. I'm playing Miles Sanders. He's one of my starts of the week. And you can think about Adam Thielen if you're desperate at wide receiver, but wide receivers are deeper, so I think you'll probably have other places to go. But I think at some point he's going to actually show some more rapport and show that he could be a decent flex play through the bye week stretch.
I do like it. I think I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I do really like Jamal Williams this week, and Miles Sanders I think is interesting as well. But let's move on to the final matchup: the Cleveland Browns at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I don't know if we talked about the Bengals, but the Steelers were also pretty disappointing to start the season. Maybe they just got the short straw of playing the San Francisco 49ers, but they were really good in the preseason. There was some buzz around Kenny Pickett, George Pickens. Deontay Johnson is a little bit banged up right now. He says he's day to day. Some reports say he's going to miss multiple weeks, so we'll have to see how that is going to go. Uh, Allen Robinson played a lot but you're not going to play him in fantasy. That's for talk about the Steelers, like, because the Cleveland Browns defense, I think, is still pretty good. I know the conditions really favored them last week, but they have Myles Garrett, they have Zadarius Smith, they have some guys on the back end, and they can get after the quarterback. So I do like the Cleveland Browns defense a lot as a streaming defense this week. We haven't talked too much about streamers, but I do like the Browns as a streaming defense. And maybe that's you get some luck like we got at the end of the last week with the Jets and the Cowboys having some game winning defenses. You get them the last game on Monday night. Uh, but on the Steelers side, like, yeah, I don't think you're playing really anybody. Like maybe Fryermuth if you want, but I think there's some other tight ends I might take some flyers on over him. You probably are playing Najee Harris, but like Warren still got a decent amount of work, so that's concerning. Maybe it's a little bit of an overreaction to the 49ers game, but Steelers not feeling it. Cleveland on the Cleveland side, Deshaun Watson, he can be in your lineup. He had the worst interception I've ever seen in my life, potentially.
Yeah, he did.
But, he also used his legs and got in the end zone and had a 20-plus quarterback week in week 1. So, think you can still play him, Nick Chubb, definitely. No Cam Hayward for the Steelers. He could have a big game. Uh, not saying you're gonna play him, but, like, don't sleep on Elijah Moore. Like, he had a pretty decent target share, and it was a sloppy game. If he continues to put some games together, like, he had a really good rookie year. Not really sure what happened in New York for him to fall out of favor there. But he could be a guy. We think Amari Cooper's the number one as the season progresses. He could be. He might not be the quote number one, but he might be the number one in targets.
1B to the 1A or something like such. I agree. I'm glad I stashed him up in a couple of leagues, and I was encouraged to see the week one, like, well enough that I wasn't even considering dropping him.
For sure. So that wraps up the full 16 game slate. We still have 16 games, no bye weeks, no bye Mageddons yet, but we will get there and we will have you all covered. But before we get out of here, we also play in a survivor pick league. I'm sure you are too. Ours is a little bit more. A lot of them, you get 3 lives. Ours, it's one and done. So Tyler is not here with his survivor pick. But George, what team are you picking?
I went Commanders last week and sweated it out. So I'm gonna pick a team that's a little bit stronger this week. I'm taking the Cowboys over the Jets.
Cowboys over the Jets. So you're going with the biggest point spread. You're using up a good team in the Cowboys, but I think it's worth it. It's probably a game. If Rodgers was playing, I highly doubt this would be the team you would pick.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I agreed.
and I think it's interesting that my only concern with this, and I think it's a good pick, and it's probably one that a lot of people pick, is can the Jets defense turn over Dak Prescott as much as they did Josh Allen? And that is potential, which kind of scares me. There's not a lot of great matchups. Since Tyler's not here, I'll tell you my wife is picking the Buffalo Bills against who they're playing. All the Las Vegas Raiders. She's riding on the Bills. Not a bad matchup there. Um, I like to sweat it out, and maybe I'm bouncing into the backup, but I'm going to go with the New York Giants over the Arizona Cardinals back-to-back weeks, picking against the Arizona Cardinals. I think they're the worst team in the league. So until I have to pick somebody that's not playing them, I'm probably going to pick against the Arizona Cardinals.
That's a bold strategy. Just picking them to go 0-17.
Yeah,
Because eventually you got to think they're going to run into one if they play as competitive as they did last week.
that is the case. Maybe I just think that you think the Commanders are going to be better than the Giants. Maybe I think the Giants are going to be better than the Commanders. So, little fun action right there. So we'll have to wait and see. But those are our Survivor picks. Let us know who you have in Survivor. We appreciate you if you made it all the way to the end. It was definitely a long episode than usual, but it's week 1. There's a lot to talk about. We're just super excited. Football is back. Just a reminder, there is one main episode with Tyler, George, and myself coming out every Friday morning. I'll be doing a bonus podcast episode earlier in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I haven't figured out the best time working my schedule to get that done, but we'll get some consistency as we move through the season here. TikTok is really taking off. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're still on all those platforms too. Make sure you're connecting with us. I'm Cody Roadcap. That's George Kerth, and we will talk to you all next week.
Boom.
Nice.